No matter how hard a person tries, they cannot escape the consequences of their own karma. Surely all of us have heard the saying, "You reap what you sow." It sounds simple, but if we truly take a moment to be still and ask ourselves, do I really believe I will receive the exact consequences of what I've done? Would we have a definite answer? Many people say, that's a truth, no doubt about it. But if we really believe that, then why do good people suffer and bad people enjoy comfort? Is there something we don't fully understand? The story below might not provide a definitive answer, but it will surely make you rethink karma, cause and effect, and the fairness of the universe. Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a pandit, a wise scholar, known for his deep knowledge and compassion. One day, he decided to travel to visit an old childhood friend, a man who was mute, deaf, and had only one leg, living in a distant village. The journey to his friend's village wasn't easy. The pandit had to cross many small villages and remote forest paths. But his heart was full of excitement, for it had been a long time since he last saw his old friend. On the way, the pandit met a strange-looking man. This man seemed to be waiting for someone in the middle of a deserted dirt road. When asked for his name, the man smiled and said, "I am Dharmaraj." The name made the pandit shiver slightly, for Dharmaraj is also another name for the god of death, Yama in the scriptures. But he quickly brushed off the thought. It must be a coincidence. Not wanting to pry further, the pandit invited Dharmaraj to walk along with him to ease the loneliness of the long road. They walked and talked together. The atmosphere was quite pleasant. But as they neared a village, Dharmaraj said, "You go ahead. I have something to do in this village. I'll catch up with you later." The pandit nodded and continued on. But soon after, he heard the news. A man in the village had just been gored to death by a buffalo in a horrifying way. While he was still in shock, Dharmaraj appeared beside him again, as if nothing had happened. The pandit felt a little uneasy, but didn't dare suspect anything yet. They continued the journey and reached another village that had a large temple on its outskirts. Since it was getting late, he suggested staying overnight at the temple. Dharmaraj said he had to deliver something to someone in the village and would return shortly. The pandit ate, rested a bit, but suddenly a fire broke out and burned the entire village to ashes within moments. Flames roared from the village, black smoke filled the sky, and villagers ran in chaos. For the second time, while the fire was still smoldering, Dharmaraj reappeared calmly beside him. The pandit began to suspect. This can't be a coincidence. Why does a disaster follow every place he visits? But he still said nothing. The next morning, they continued on. Near noon, they reached another village, and like before, Dharmaraj said, "I'm going into the village to meet an old friend. You go ahead, I'll catch up later." This time, the pandit didn't continue. He hid behind a bush to observe. And then, as if fated, a man in the village was bitten by a snake and died instantly. At that very moment, Dharmaraj appeared again, as if nothing had happened. Unable to bear it anymore, the pandit turned and confronted him. "Who are you really? Why does someone die wherever you go?" Dharmaraj smiled, his voice calm but eerily resonant. "I thought a wise man like you would have figured it out sooner. I am Yamadut, messenger of the god of death. I come to collect the souls of those whose time has come." Hearing this, the pandit trembled. His long-held suspicions were now confirmed. Shaking, he asked, "Then, who is the next to die?" Dharmaraj calmly replied, "The friend you're going to visit, and that death will happen because of you." The answer struck like a knife to the heart. The pandit stood frozen. He couldn't comprehend. How could he be the reason his dearest friend would die? "Then, it's best I don't go to see him anymore," the pandit said in despair. But Dharmaraj only shook his head. "You cannot escape fate. Even if you turn back now, that death will still happen. You have already stepped into your destined role, and the event will unfold, exactly as it was meant to." At that moment, from behind, a limping figure came rushing forward. It was the pandit's mute and crippled friend. Though he couldn't call out or run fast, he had used every bit of strength he had to catch up with his old friend. Just as he reached him, before saying a word, the friend collapsed to the ground. His heart couldn't withstand the strain. He died instantly in the pandit's arms. The pandit stood frozen, tears falling silently. He turned to look at Dharmaraj, pleading for an explanation. And the messenger of death only said, "Because you were the destination, your friend pushed himself to his limits to reach you. You did nothing wrong, but you were still the cause." Pandit sat beside the body of his close friend, eyes filled with tears. Though he knew that birth, aging, sickness, death was an unchangeable law, witnessing the death of his friend right before his eyes, and unintentionally being the cause, was something that nearly broke him. No one can accept being the reason a loved one passes away, no matter what the truth may be. But as a wise man, he still tried to keep his mind calm. He understood. Death is something no one can avoid. Yet this time, his very understanding led him to another question. Is it possible to know about one's own death in advance? And he turned to look at Dharmaraj, that strange messenger with determined eyes. If you truly are a Yamadut, then what about my death? When, where, and how? Dharmaraj looked at him intently. A long pause, then softly replied, "Knowing one's own death is not advisable, for no being is calm enough to receive such a thing. But you are different. You just witnessed the death of a loved one, yet did not collapse. Perhaps you are strong enough to endure that truth." Pandit swallowed hard, his heart trembling, but he remained composed. "Then tell me." Dharmaraj was silent for a moment, then slowly answered, 6 months from today, on this very date, you will die by hanging in another kingdom. And the strangest part is, you will willingly accept the noose with your own will." Pandit was stunned. Those words pierced his mind like needles. How could that be possible? A person who knows in advance that he will die, yet voluntarily steps onto the gallows. He asked no more. Silently, he arranged for his friend, performed a complete funeral, then returned to the village with a heaviness he had never known. From that day on, he lived under the shadow of fear. Though he was a knowledgeable man, though he had taught many about karma and accepting the law of birth and death, now, with the time, place, and method of his death already revealed, his courage began to waver. But Pandit was no ordinary man. He was determined not to let fate win so easily. If death was to come by hanging in another kingdom, then the best way was never to leave his own kingdom. And he made a plan. Pandit went to the royal palace, where he had once had connections with the king due to his knowledge and virtue. He told the king the whole story, from the strange encounter, the death of his friend, to Dharmaraj's prophecy. The king was a wise man. Upon hearing it, he did not judge hastily. He summoned ministers and scholars in court to discuss. After a while, a high official said, "If what this pandit says is true, then death will only come when he leaves the kingdom. So we only need to keep him inside the palace for the next 6 months. There's nothing else to worry about." The king agreed. A private room in the palace was prepared for Pandit. He was fully taken care of, like a valued guest. To prevent any mishap, the king also issued a decree. No one was allowed to take Pandit out of the city. No one could meet him without the king's permission. At first, Pandit felt somewhat at ease. He lived quietly, withdrawn. Those 6 months were like a silent escape, full of tension. Every night he dreamed of the noose, the gallows, and the cold face of Dharmaraj. Time passed. 1 month, 2 months, then 4 months, until only one final night remained before the appointed date. Pandit breathed a sigh of relief. Just get through this night, and I'm free. Perhaps fate can be deceived. Thinking so, he went to bed early to avoid being disturbed by worry. But there was something even he didn't know. Pandit had a condition, sleepwalking, and due to the prolonged anxiety, that illness suddenly acted up on the very fateful night. He got up unconsciously. No guards stopped him, since everyone knew he was a royal guest. In his sleepwalking state, he wandered out of the palace, passed through the forest, mounted a horse from the royal stable, and unknowingly crossed the border of the kingdom. No one noticed. Before dawn, Pandit had already set foot in a neighboring kingdom. He continued walking in that strange sleep, passed through the city gates unchecked, entered the palace, and then into the bedroom of the king and queen. Since it was late at night, everyone was fast asleep. Pandit lay down on the bed beside the queen and drifted off. When dawn broke, screams echoed throughout the palace. The king discovered a strange man lying right next to the queen in his own private chamber. Soldiers rushed in and immediately arrested Pandit. Chaos broke out in the palace of the neighboring kingdom that morning. A strange man, clothes covered in dust, fast asleep, had appeared right next to the queen in the king's private bedchamber. No one understood what was happening. The king was furious. To him, this was the greatest insult, an unforgivable violation. "Drag him out! Prepare for execution immediately!" thundered the king. The pandit was jolted awake by the commotion and rough hands yanking him from bed. He panicked, confused, his eyes still dazed, his mind unable to grasp the situation. Then he realized this wasn't his kingdom. The king's face was unfamiliar, the queen too. None of the attendants were known to him. I've left the kingdom? But how? Why am I here?" In that swirl of confusion, he heard the king roar. "This man must be a spy. How could he sneak into my private chamber at night without anyone noticing? He must be executed as a warning." Suddenly, the pandit remembered Dharmaraj's prophecy. 6 months from now, you will die by hanging in another kingdom, and you will willingly accept that death. A chill ran through him. He looked up and realized today was that day. Day 180, exactly 6 months later. He screamed in desperation, "Your Majesty, please listen to me. I can explain everything." The king waved his hand. "Very well. If you can convince me that this is fate and not conspiracy, speak. But if you're lying, today will be the day you die." The pandit bowed his head and took a deep breath. Then he began telling the entire story of the past 6 months. His meeting with Dharmaraj, the death of his friend, the terrifying prophecy, his request to his own king to remain hidden in the palace, and even last night, how he must have wandered in his sleep without knowing it. He left out no detail. Every word was filled with sincerity and fear. At first, the king was furious. Then, slowly, he became pensive. His eyes flickered with suspicion, but his rage was no longer so fierce. Finally, he said, "Your story sounds like a desperate fable to escape death. But if it's true, it must be verified." Immediately, he dispatched his 2 best soldiers to ride through the night to the neighboring kingdom to confirm the facts. While waiting, the pandit was placed under house arrest. He was not tortured, but his heart burned with dread. Every heartbeat brought thoughts of the noose. For 6 months, he had lived in fear to avoid death. But that very fear had pushed him toward it. And now, fate seemed to be smiling, bitterly. That night, the two soldiers returned. They entered the court, knelt, and reported, "Your Majesty, everything the pandit said is true. The king of that land confirmed he kept the pandit in the palace for 6 months. He personally saw him the night before. And then, the man simply vanished." The court fell silent. Even the king couldn't hide his astonishment. If everything was true, this was not conspiracy. It was a chase led by destiny, something beyond human control. But the trouble wasn't over. The king remembered. He had declared before the entire court that he would execute the pandit if his story was false. Now, if he spared him, wouldn't that be seen as breaking his word and losing royal credibility? After discussion, the ministers proposed a clever solution. "Your Majesty, to uphold your promise without killing an innocent man, hang him with a noose made of raw silk thread, thin, unspun, fragile. That way, your people will see you kept your word. But the thread will snap, and the man will survive." The king agreed. "A silk thread? Very well. Let fate decide." The day of the execution, the entire kingdom gathered to witness it. No one believed a man could die from a thread as thin as hair. The pandit stepped up to the gallows. He did so willingly, just as Dharmaraj had foretold. He raised his head, eyes gently closing. "If this is destiny, I won't run anymore." The noose was tightened. The executioner gave the signal. The silk thread snapped immediately. But in that fleeting moment, a vein in his neck burst, blood sprayed, and the pandit collapsed. He died instantly. The crowd stood in shock. No one had imagined that a fragile silk thread, something everyone believed would snap at the slightest pull, could take a man's life. It wasn't strangulation. The thread did break, just as expected. But in that brief moment of free fall, a blood vessel in the pandit's neck ruptured. Blood gushed out like a spring. Death came quietly, swiftly, cleanly, and no one could explain how. The pandit collapsed, a faint trace of peace still on his face, as if he had accepted everything long ago. No one understood what had just happened. But Dharmaraj, the messenger of death, understood. Somewhere, he stood silently, unseen. Perhaps among the crowd, or maybe as an invisible breath of wind. He murmured softly, "I told you, you would climb the noose with your own feet." As the pandit's body was carried away, the king remained silent, his royal pride shattered by the one force no man could defy: karma. He looked at the snapped silk thread, still stained with blood. A minister leaned in and whispered, "Your Majesty, that man did not die from the thread. He died from the destiny that had already chosen him." A month later, the king ordered a great stone memorial to be erected at the site of the execution. Etched upon it were these words: "Here lies a wise man who died not for his sins, but because destiny could not be avoided. A man may hide from truth, may outsmart others, may even have kings stand behind him. But when the hour strikes, karma will arrive. In its time, in its way, to the right person." The story of the pandit spread across kingdoms. It became a living lesson, transcending time, beyond scriptures. Because it wasn't just about death, it was about fear, futile resistance, and the blind belief that we can outwit the workings of karma. The pandit, with all his wisdom and caution, had tried to escape the inevitable. But in doing so, he walked straight into the very death he feared most. Final message. We, small, fragile humans, always seek to know the future, to control everything. We pray to gods, cling to horoscopes, consult astrologers, hoping to find a shortcut, a way to escape suffering, escape death, escape fate. But If we knew the moment of our death, would we live better? Or just live in fear, waiting for the day to arrive? Lord Krishna once said in the Bhagavad Gita, "Whatever happens is right. Whatever has not happened, it's not yet time. Whatever doesn't happen, it was never meant for you. Do not fear. Do your duty with a pure heart. The results will come, according to karma." Had the pandit never known his fate, perhaps he would have lived those final 6 months joyfully, fully. But because he knew, he lived haunted, anxious, tormented for 180 days. And in the end, death came anyway. So this story isn't here to make you fear death. It is here to remind you, live each day fully, sow good karma, and stop trying to control what lies beyond your reach. That is the work of the universe. And may you live a life not of avoidance, but one of standing tall, true to yourself.